Welcome to a Homegrown Family Podcast, where we grow the produce and the kids.
Hey everybody, welcome to a Homegrown Family Podcast. I'm your host, Joe Metler. I want to throw out a little bit of kudos to some relatives of mine about my podcast tiles. So for those of you guys who don't know what a podcast tile is, it's basically the image that shows up on my main page for my podcast, but also the images that show up on individual episodes. And so the main podcast image was done by my sister-in-law, Aaliyah, along with the scarecrow image that you'll see when I do my gardening type episodes. Aaliyah also did the mushrooms tile, so occasionally I'll have a mushrooms and foraging type of podcast, and those tiles will be representative of those types of topics. My sister-in-law, Aaliyah, she does have 6 children with my brother Michael, and so she gets a little bit busy and informed me that as much as she'd like to, she probably can't continue to draw and do my tiles for me for specific topics. And so I found out that through the grapevine, and things, that my cousin Justin, who you just heard on Just 'Cause episode in regards to talking about him and visiting the farms of Minnesota, I realized that his daughter, Jillian, also does a pretty good artist. So I asked her to do some of my tiles as well. And those tiles include any of the ones with animals on it, for like anytime we talk about pigs or chickens or anything farm-related raising animals. She also did a orchard one that has like a table that has an apple and a grape on it. So that's pretty cool that she did that one for me. I really like those. Appreciate you guys for doing that for me. I look forward to doing some more tiles like that in the future. And so it kind of brings me to the orchard. So we've talked a little bit about the orchard in general and referred to it in other podcasts. But today I want to talk about its origin story. And so I have the 2 culprits that started this whole thing. I've got my brother David, Hello, who you've seen on this podcast before. And I also have my dad, Randy, who's also been on this podcast before.
Hello.
And he's been, I guess he was part of the first episode, The Man, the Beast, the Legend. You can go back and listen to that one if you would like to. Learn a little bit more about his history and upbringing and the farm that he grew up on and things. So you can always listen to that one. But today, the origin story of the orchard. So how did it all get started?
So I guess I can start with my background. We talked about that before, and that's kind of leads into the origin story of the orchard. I was doing my master's up at NDSU, and so I was in the horticulture program for my bachelor's, and in my master's, I was researching blackberries. But I was part of the high-value crop group, and they did research on all sorts of different things like hops, juneberries, high tunnel production, grapes, all sorts of stuff that I was involved in as well, even though it wasn't my research project. So I had exposure to a lot of things that are up in the orchard right now.
I don't know whose idea was to start it, though. Did you bring it up?
I think I did. So Dad had a patch of corn in this little area. It's about 5 acres, maybe max, of open area. Yeah. And you had corn on maybe 2 acres of it, roughly, on the one side.
Yeah.
And so I had access to cheap cuttings or cheap plants for a few different things. We started with juneberries and blackberries, black currants, and some grapes.
Yeah.
And so some of these I knew people who had plants, and from my work at NDSU, I knew how to start cuttings. Right, so I just found people with different grapevines, and I'd start cuttings, and we put in a few down here at the house by the garden to start off with, just to plant a few to see how they did.
Yeah, what did y'all start there, by the garden there?
So we had Marquette.
Grapes.
Grapes, yeah. It was just grapes. Well, and some blackberries that I regret.
The blackberries have lots of thorns.
Yeah, that's a variety called...
I think I picked those once.
Yeah, it's called Illinois Hardy, and it is a very thorny but very hardy grape that you could grow in this area. But the thorns are regretful.
Blackberries.
Yes.
Yeah.
So yeah, we tried some grapes there, and it seemed like they were growing okay. And so I think what happened is I asked Dad if I could steal his little 2-acre patch of corn.
Yeah, food plot or something you got going on.
This was a patch of corn that I grew while I was working full time, it'd be just something I'd harvest to have a little ear of corn and something a deer could eat. And I'd put it in. I put it in with a planter. I don't think I had row markers on my planter. I just eyeballed it. So it wasn't a professional corn plot by any means.
But the deer liked it, I'm sure.
Oh, and it's only a couple acres large, and I know we've definitely did a fair amount of rock picking on that spot. And so I don't know how the conversation went. It's like, hey, Dad, can I put some plants up in that spot? Or just say, hey, can I plant something somewhere? And Dad was like, this is a good spot. I'm sure you didn't want to give up any of your good primo hay ground or anything.
Well, no.
No, I didn't even ask that. No, I'm pretty sure I saw that patch up there and thought it's small enough and it's not going to take out of any actual decent production of anything. So I think I asked about that specific spot.
Yeah, and it's a little bit sandier, well-drained, something that might be really conducive for grapes.
Yep, grapes don't like wet feet, and traditionally in Europe, I mean, they've been grown on real sandy, crappy, almost non-agricultural ground. That's kind of how they were grown over there, so that's how they've adapted, really.
Yeah, so it should have really taken off in that spot there.
And they've done pretty well there.
Well, from what I gather, they've done better there than grapes. Most people put in grapes around here. They grew a lot faster anyway, but I think that might have been because of turkey manure from the previous land use.
Yeah, so basically started these things, had a couple rows of grapes, some blackberries, and then some currants and juneberries. Is there anything specific you guys did to the land or prior to establishing this? I mean, you guys have a huge fence around the spot, 8 foot tall.
Yeah, I seeded grass before we went in there with the other stuff, so.
Okay.
Right, yeah.
So that got some grass going.
Leveled it out, seeded grass, put up an 8 foot tall fence for the deer to stay out of it. And then we put down landscape fabric in the rows for mostly moisture retention, but also so competition with grass and weeds wouldn't occur. But
yeah,
definitely for moisture retention to get them started because it is a sandier site and we don't have water access up there. That's so true. That was kind of part of it, is getting established with some sort of a barrier to keep some moisture.
You guys spent some time hauling water up there too, I remember.
Yeah, we hauled that green tank up there.
We gave him a little drink once in a while.
By we mean Dad.
Dad's the groundskeeper.
Yep.
As the things kind of progressed at the orchard, it's enlarged, right? You can talk a little bit about the process for thinking what the plan or idea was there.
So I guess,
we kind of used it as a little bit of an experimental area to see what would grow up here.
Plot.
Yeah.
First, yes.
That first 4, so we had 4 rows of grapes and 25 plants in each row. So we started out with 100 grapes. And what we did is we planted probably 12, 13 different varieties in blocks of 4. And some more than others because we had access to more of them and we were kind of knew that some of them would hopefully perform better. We didn't want to plant a bunch of one variety that wouldn't pan out. And some of those varieties we have since removed because they didn't do well or they died off.
I was going to ask you, so which varieties for my listeners shouldn't plant in this area or this neck of the woods?
Well, I know Brianna is one that's a struggle for people to grow in this area because of winter hardiness. We still have a few plants because it does taste really good and has a good aroma as far as the wine goes.
Made a pretty good wine out of that, yeah.
Yep. Prairie Star is another one that we've struggled with, but it's kind of hit or miss. Some years they do pretty well, other years not as much. Yeah, most of them have done pretty well, though.
Yeah.
For the most part.
What are some of your favorites, Dad?
Well, the Valiant has done well, and that's good grape. Some of the newer ones we had, those are all ones we had early on, and some of the newer ones we have Louis Swenson. I really like how that one turns out. And I like how the Sabravois is doing. Yeah. I think that's doing really well.
Like wine, is production or...
Production-wise, they've been pretty easy to take care of.
So, like we said, we start with that first 100, right? And then Joe got kind of interested in brewing more. And
I'm not sure when I got into it.
Yeah.
when did I get into this whole thing?
I don't remember exactly. It started off with me looking at them more of like eating and jelly and juice and stuff, but then we had a few wine grapes in there too.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, Joe was trying to do these little 5-gallon batches or 3-gallon batches, and I was like, well, we should really plant some more.
Yeah, and I did some beer brewing in Alaska, and then when I came back this direction, that's when I kind of started helping out with it a little bit, and then I went back to NDSU started working there, get my master's also, but I took a brewing class at that time. It's kind of like an employee benefit, one class a semester. I'm like, I might as well learn a little bit more. Maybe that triggered a little bit more of like, hey, let's actually try to make some wine out of some of this. And yeah.
I think the other part of that too was we were also interested in potentially selling some grapes to a local winery. And so I had talked to them about what varieties they'd be interested in. So those varieties in that newer area, that's why we planted those varieties, was because they were interested in them. So the Sabravois, Louis Swenson, Frontenac Blanc, and the Prairie Star were all varieties that they were interested in. And, we were interested in them as well.
Yeah.
The Sabravois had done pretty well in our little test block. And we knew Frontenac Blanc would grow well in our area. Louis Swenson's a little bit of a slow grower, but it's turning out pretty good. Yeah. And then I planted one other row there. I just wanted more Bluebell and more Somerset seedless, so we have another row of those.
Yeah, so we haven't talked about those a whole lot yet. What are the big perks about the Bluebell and Somerset seedless?
Well, David likes the Bluebell for the juice, and it's basically a juice grape.
It's pretty delicious.
And the Somerset seedless, big surprise. The big advantage is it's seedless, so we can make raisins out of it, and it makes really nice raisins.
Tastes really good fresh, too, honestly,
Oh, yeah.
even before they're raisins.
Most of them do.
I think Dad has a story to tell about raisins.
Oh, no, you don't want to hear it. You don't want
We're
to
not. No, we're not putting that. We're not. No, we won't do that to you.
I gave you guys an opportunity.
No.
Pass up on it. All right. Well, I appreciate that. My kids will know what raisins are and where they come from. But that's something that Dave and I talked about a little bit here, is that it's a lot of work at the orchard and upkeep. And then these past couple weekends, we've been pressing grapes, pressing apples, and making juice and all this type of stuff. And eventually, our kids and children will be able to kind of help partake in that, and hopefully it'll ease the burden a little bit. But
Yeah, so I guess right now, just so the listeners know, we have 100 vines in the old area. I think we have 150 vines in the new area.
Yeah.
And we also planted 50 apple trees in the last couple of years in the newer area. And we have grafted varieties on there for making cider. And we also tested little blocks of 4 or 5 with different rootstock to see which ones would do well in our area. And so we're looking forward to seeing how that does, and then also getting some more varieties that we can do some hard cider with.
yeah, and a lot of the University of Minnesota varieties, when it comes to apples, is it Cosmic Crisp, I believe, and Honeycrisp is a Minnesota apple too, I think.
Yeah.
So yeah, a couple of those are in the Haraldsons. They're all pretty good for this region if you're just wanting fresh eating apples. Do you guys remember what kind of apples we put up for cider making?
Yeah, so there's a few. We haven't really gotten any apples from these yet.
No.
They're really young trees that we had grafted on, and we've had some issues with voles chewing off some of the trees, unfortunately. But some of the ones we have tried up there would be Ashmead's Kernel, Kingston Black, Fox Whelp. Anyway, those are 3 varieties that we've tried up there.
I was trying to think of some more too, but
Yeah, I can't think of them all off the top of my head. And some of them haven't been necessarily for cider either. Some of them are just, eating apples. But some of the ones that we actually planted, like that bulk of that other row, aren't official varieties. They're actually apples that Dad has out in his pasture. And so they found a few.
That I've discovered.
Yes.
yeah.
So what's out there? We got the red crab.
The red crab and the Ridgeway.
So we've given all these different apples out in our pasture some of these names that we've tried to make in juice that are consistent producers. In the pasture, we got anything from big yellow ones to little red crab apples, and they all taste different. It's kind of cool how, I think rumor has it there must have been like an old orchard back in the day up in that neck of the woods or something.
There's an old house in the woods there, and from what I gather, this man raised apples out there, and so there's there's probably 8 or 9 different trees out there that we get some apples off of on a regular basis.
Yeah, they're pretty decent.
Not every year, biannually at least. Yeah.
I mean, there's quite the variety. We have ones out there that are these big yellow ones. Well, that tree died, but we saved that one.
Yeah, David and his grafting ability came into hand.
And then there's some big green ones, some smaller yellow ones, some smaller red ones. I mean, it's quite the variety.
Yeah. And I don't even know how our naming process went for some of that, but like the campfire yellow, when we were high schoolers, we go out and camp out in the pasture with some buddies and friends and get a fire started and roast marshmallows. And have territory battles of... we're young teenage kids here. You know, you got to prank the campsite next to you. And that was a tree that was present at one of the campsites one year. And
well, an interesting story about one of the apples out there. When people are developing apples at the University of Minnesota and stuff, they look at stuff like sugar and how well they store and stuff like that. And there's an apple out there you can pick off the tree, and it is just dynamite flavor, crisp, and everything. And I know a guy in Little Falls on my mail route. I took one to him a couple days after I picked it.
mealy?
They're mealy within a few days.
Wow.
They do not keep at all.
Oh, is that the one I call that one? I thought it was like crisp red or something. Like they're nice and crisp right when you pick them, but then they get
you go through the pasture, you pick one of them. It's the best apple you ever had.
Is that the one kind of down the
down
ridge?
that dip?
Yeah. I grafted that one, I think, but I think that tree died.
Oh, well, that's good.
That one's worthless.
They don't keep at
Throw
all.
it out.
I mean, most of those apples don't keep long, do they? I mean,
Some of the green ones do. Some of the green ones keep pretty well.
The green one does. The yellow one didn't. You know, that was one that was kind of more of a baking apple. Kind of really soft, early August kind of an apple. But the red crab, that's probably one of the favorites, I guess. And that's a really nice crab apple.
it's been the base for some of the hard ciders I've started off making at the farm. I can usually get a red crab batch every year and then kind of adjust recipes and things like that. Kind of going back to the orchard here. So we expanded a bunch of grapes. We have a winery nearby that said they would be interested in potentially purchasing some grapes from us. And so we went that route, and then we added more apples. And I think the main reason there was to just get some more cider stuff going for some apple-y type stuff, and some fresh eaters too, because Mom's trees in the yard are starting to die. They're so old, but David did plant a couple up in front of the house there too, with some Honeycrisp or whatever too. But
yeah, Sweet 16, that yellow one that we saved from the pasture, that one's in the yard. And then
that's another Minnesota cultivar, I believe, Sweet 16.
Yeah.
Yes. Yep. And then we got a grafted tree off of that one that's kind of fallen apart in the yard too.
Mm-hmm. Picked them the other day. Pretty nice.
A couple things in the orchard that we didn't mention yet was that eventually you added some aronia berries.
Yes. Yeah. We have a few aronia berries. And then also recently, just in the last 2 years, we added some tart cherries because Joe was really interested in putting those in.
Yeah, I went over to Bismarck, North Dakota, actually, did the You-Pick tart cherry place, and their cultivars they were using was Romeo and Juliet, and so we planted 2 or 3 of those, and yeah, just had to test them out.
You're forgetting one of our favorites, the asparagus.
Oh, yeah.
I forgot, yeah. So I started some asparagus from seed. By some, I mean like several hundred plants.
Yeah.
And then we decided to plant it along the outside of the fence on, maybe a third of the orchard.
Yeah.
And then I planted a bunch at my house too. But yeah, the asparagus is doing pretty well up there.
Yes. It's
yeah.
good.
Well, it's always a pain to try to weed rip and keep your fence clean, so put some asparagus and then you have an excuse not to.
Yep.
So, yeah, that, and you have certain things you're working on now currently. We talked about trying to do some pears up at the orchard here soon.
Oh, yeah. So we were going to replace some of the apple trees that were killed from the voles or just didn't do very well with some pear trees. And so I got about 20 rootstock I ordered from somewhere. And then we ordered some pear scion as well to go with that. But we collected some also from one of our uncle's houses. He had a really good pear tree there, consistent, heavy producer. No idea what the name is because it was there when he bought the house.
Yeah. And I know the juice is good and the perry tastes even good also.
So we got some pears that were specifically made for making perries. And they're called Butt, B-U-T-T. Hopefully it tastes better than the name.
Yeah.
a Huffcap Yellow, or Yellow Huffcap. I can't remember.
Which I heard is supposed to be pretty popular. I mean, I talked about Winter Hardy pears in a previous episode, and I think some of those we had mentioned, so.
Yeah, and then I got a dessert pear, Aurora. And then, so those 4 are the ones that we're going to try up at the orchard.
And that was before I went to the talk about Winter Hardy pears,
yeah.
So. Now I learned a little bit more about rootstock and maybe some different cultivars that we would try if we don't successfully plant these or
yeah,
get
if we need some
more
trees.
Yeah, so check out that previous episode there if you want to learn a little bit more about Winter Hardy pears. But we did cultivate or graft on some of the pasture apples to those 2 new rows at the end, so that's been kind of a development there.
I think about 15 of those trees in that last row are...
Yeah, the red crabs and the ridge Ys, I believe.
I did harvest red crab and ridge rye from that row this year.
Oh, you did?
Well, there was a few out there.
apples.
Yeah, that's right.
You have an apple tree orchard that's like 2-3 years old. You don't want to let a whole lot of apples go, so you want to have the plants put more energy into the roots and things, but we obviously didn't have very many that we didn't hardly notice them, so...
I think another one in that row is MN 1734, which is not an official release variety from Minnesota. It wasn't named or anything, but it's something you can get. It's supposed to be good for cider. So we have 5 of those in that row.
So those are mostly cider rows, with a couple of mixtures of some fresh eaters. Dad, did you always, I don't know, Dave kind of brought this whole thing to fruition, but did you ever had an interest in anything else besides raising cattle or livestock and raking up hay and things like that?
Well, you tried bees here for a couple of years. I was always kind of interested in trying that out, but I've always harvested stuff from the woods. I went and picked blueberries with the neighbors when I was a little kid up in northern Minnesota. Well, I was picking those apples before you were making cider.
On the way up to the orchard, too, in the woods, as we were kids, there was rows of raspberries in there that we used to pick all the time, too.
Blackberries and raspberries.
Yeah. Kind of died back.
I enjoy harvesting stuff from the woods.
I mean, really, that's part of the reason why I kind of got into horticulture is all this stuff that we were always harvesting out in the woods. There's wild plums, there's wild grapes, there's gooseberries out there, all sorts of stuff. It's just kind of...
Tell you what, if those grapes that Mom harvested as kids, though, or gooseberries, and she made juice out of it, it was always the tartest stuff. I don't know.
Yeah, it had a little sugar to it,
I think you guys are pretty good fans of it, but I wasn't always, as a young kid, I didn't always enjoy that, I guess. But it's a good canning, and it's a good way to live off the land and that kind of stuff, so.
Now we're just taking it to the next level.
Yeah, cultivating some of our own.
Have some tame ones, and we're getting some really good apples out there.
Like I said, it's a lot of work now, but in the end here, with all my siblings having kids and everything, and then once they get older, it'll be a good family thing. People can bond, and hey, it's time for apple harvest weekend kind of thing, and all the nieces and nephews get together and stuff. And
well, the grandchildren get to enjoy our apple roll-ups already.
True. Yeah. So Mom's kind of known for that, actually. So Mom will make some applesauce out of these apples and stuff, and she'll put them in a dehydrator, kind of spread them out nicely and thin on a spoon and everything, and let's it dehydrate. And who needs to buy like fruit roll-ups from the store?
Well, and some people call it fruit leather. Fruit leather would be another really common way of another name for that. Mm. But these fruit roll-ups that we call them are actually really popular with our classmates apparently too. Our youngest brother Nicholas brought up the other day that he was selling those.
What?
In 4th grade, he said that he had classmates that would buy them from him for $1 each.
What?
And he had a waiting list. And so he was making money off of these fruit roll-ups, he said. And I was like, no, you were printing money because you didn't even do the work to make the roll-ups.
That reminds me of something I did when I was in about 4th, 5th grade. I don't know if you know this story.
Let's hear it.
My mother was a school nurse, right?
Yeah.
We had open noon hours, so the older kids could go uptown. I would take orders from the younger kids for gum, basically, mainly Miss gum, and it was 25 cents for a pack of Bubblicious, and I charged them 30 cents.
So the younger kids couldn't go out.
No, it's just like.
But you would take orders for them and make a little.
I got cut off fairly quickly.
Oh.
When the teacher started complaining about gum in class and found out that,
who the supplier was.
It didn't last long.
Oh, funny. I guess the big next question is, what do we have on the horizon when it comes to the orchard? What's next? Any plans, or are we thinking kind of go with the flow?
The next thing right now is the pears. That's kind of the next thing we got to work on putting in and stuff. Some of our stuff's not even at full production yet. The apples aren't really producing yet. The grapes are almost at full production. So we are, we're kind of still, going with the flow, I guess, like you said.
Yeah, yep.
Yeah, until I retire, we can't really add much more.
Right. Unless you retire, if someone moves closer, you can't really add anything else.
Yeah, it gets to be a lot. And knowing us, there'll be some weird things that we decide to try at some point. I thought maybe Hass caps would be kind of interesting. I heard they always don't taste the best depending on what kind of Hass caps you get.
Yeah, it depends. I mean, I planted some down in Renville, but they don't like high pH. They didn't do well in my area, but they'd probably do okay up here.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I think that's the the wrap for this podcast, for this episode. Just talking a little bit about the origin of the orchard and how it came to be. Because upcoming here, we have a couple episodes coming up here with apple and grape harvesting and cider and winemaking. So figured we'd get everybody on the same page here. And if you have any questions or kind of curious about anything, you can always feel free to email me at homegrownfam@gmail.com or follow me on the Instagram. You can also ask me any questions there if you'd like. Also at homegrownfam on Instagram. So, yeah, thank you, too, for sharing a story. I wasn't quite sure exactly how it came to fruition, although I had a pretty good idea.
No,
it's all his fault.
Yeah, it's David's fault. That's it, yeah.
All right, thanks, everybody.